You're with Clement Manyathela.
7:02. Let's walk the talk.
24 minutes now before 11 o'clock. Who is Leo Brent Bozell III? That's the man that U.S. President Donald Trump has nominated as the new ambassador to South Africa. So what we're going to do now is speak to David Smith, who is the Washington, D.C. bureau chief for The Guardian, who is live to us from Washington, D.C., to tell us more about this man that Trump has nominated to be an ambassador to South Africa. His nomination has now been referred to the U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations for consideration, but it's actually expected to be given the green light. But there are such interesting things about this man for us to know about. And of course, the question is whether or not, with the tensions that are high between the U.S. and South Africa, this is the man who can, yes, push for U.S. interests and advance them when he's here, balance that with also trying to help us rebuild the relations between South Africa and the United States. David, thank you so much for making time for us. Good morning.
Good morning. Great to be here.
So Leo Brent Bozell III is now the person that the Trump administration is nominating to be the ambassador to South Africa. Who is he?
Yeah, Brent Bozell is a right-winger who's been running a right-wing media watchdog for many years, and really being part of that vanguard of the rise of right-wing media in America that I think has been so influential in dividing the country and helping Donald Trump win elections and so on. He is a problematic character, I think many people would say, for this position of U.S. ambassador to South Africa. In 1989, his watchdog, the Media Research Center, put out a press release describing the ANC as, quote, pro-communist terrorist organization, close quote. He's also had some choice things to say about former U.S. President Barack Obama. In 2012, Bozell described Obama as looking like a, quote, skinny ghetto crackhead, close quote. Two other things of great note I would say about Bozell is he's a staunch supporter of Israel. He even started trying to raise money for Israel after the October the 7th attack. And that, of course, is interesting at this moment when South Africa was leading that genocide case at the International Court of Justice over the war in Gaza. And another notable thing about Brent Bozell is his son was one of nearly 1,600 people convicted and sentenced after the January 6th attack on the in 2021 on the U.S. Capitol, only to be later pardoned by Trump. And I think that'll ensure that, having been a one-time Trump critic, Bozell is now a big fan of the U.S. president.
But he wasn't fan of the U.S. president before, was he?
Indeed. And in that sense, Bozell is like many American conservatives who were initially very suspicious of Trump. And that certainly included some Christian evangelicals and others. You know, they regarded Trump as staging a hostile takeover of the Republican Party, especially in 2016. Bozell described Trump as the greatest charlatan of them all, a huckster, a shameless self-promoter. Bozell said, God help this country if this man were president. And again, you know, like so many other conservatives over the years, for one reason or another, Bozell has made peace with Trump. Many would say sacrificing political principle in favor of power, and clearly Trump's decision to pardon Bozell's son, I think, really sealed the deal, and now he's fully aboard the Trump train.
Sure. I just want to clarify something there, David. Did you say that he once described Obama as a skinny ghetto crackhead?
Yes, this was in a Fox News interview in 2012. It is pretty startling, isn't it? He was initially joking with Sean Hannity, Fox News host. What if he made a comment about the president of the United States and said he looked like a skinny ghetto crackhead? And then Bozell added, which, by the way, you might want to say that Barack Obama does. And, he crossed the line from a joke to actually saying this. So this does not bode well for a man entering the racial complexities of South Africa.
So if he has described Donald Trump before as the greatest charlatan of them all, God help this country if this man were president, how, and this happens a lot in America, maybe you can help us as South Africans understand how politicians there then rationalize their approach and decisions when they now work with Donald Trump and they sing his praises when previously they've said all these terrible things about him. And I mean, there's one thing to criticize a politician. We know there are no permanent friends or permanent enemies in politics. But some of the things that some Republicans say about Donald Trump, even during, the presidential primaries or during the debate, and then boom, when they are not the Republican nominees, suddenly they start singing the praises of the man that they have been attacking so much because he has an opportunity for them to work with him. How does it work?
Yeah, I mean, as you speak, you're reminding me of two prime examples there. J.D. Vance, now Trump's vice president. Again, back in 2016, he was comparing Trump to Adolf Hitler, for example, and urging people not to vote for him and saying what a disaster it would be. And, another interesting example is Marco Rubio, who was defeated by Trump in those Republican primaries in 2016. He said all sorts of negative things about Trump at the time and, predicted it'd be the end of the Republican Party and so on. Now Rubio sits at Trump's side as Secretary of State. So, I mean, there you've got two of the most powerful men in this government, both former Trump critics. And so many others in the Republican Party have done the same. We've watched that journey. I think critics would say it's sheer spinelessness. It's selling their soul to the devil. It's making a Faustian pact that many of them deep down still believe the things they said nearly a decade ago. But they've seen the big crowds that Trump draws. They've seen him winning elections. They want a taste of that power, and they're willing to say and do anything for it. And they've also witnessed what has happened to those who stood their ground. Vice President Mike Pence, I mean, was sycophantic on many levels, but he refused to overturn the 2020 election and ended up with a mob storming the Capitol calling for him to be hanged. And then there are other Republicans such as Liz Cheney, who was defeated in a primary election, and Adam Kinzinger, who was driven out by death threats and so on. If you're a Republican and you actually oppose Trump, you can get a lot of hate and hostility and threats to your family and so on. So many of these people have chosen the more convenient path.
Is this the same thing that happens also with Democrats?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
One major political party in America is still relatively normal and mainstream, and like we see in the rest of the world. But the other party, as in the Republicans, have, I think, driven off a cliff and become a personality cult. And who knows if they can return to the Ronald Reagan, George Bush era one day. I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah, you may just hold that for way too long. It's just interesting how things are unfolding, especially for us who are outside of America. But back to Leo Brent Bozell III. His nomination has now been referred to the U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations for consideration. What are the chances that this name may be rejected? And I'm asking that because this is the same committee that is chaired by the same person who I think is Jim Risch, if I'm not mistaken, who has previously pushed for South Africa to be kicked out of that program that allows sub-Saharan countries to have access to U.S. markets through AGOA. Do you see this nomination going through that committee successfully?
I think so. Republicans control everything right now. The White House, the House of Representatives, the Senate, even the Supreme Court. So there's a conservative majority. So we've seen nominee after nominee go through, including some very controversial Trump cabinet picks. Pete Hegseth as Defense Secretary and Tulsi Gabbard as Director of National Intelligence and so on. And Robert Kennedy Jr. as Health Secretary. And Democrats have tried to kick up a fuss and make noise and object, but ultimately on these committees, it's often like a 12-11 or 13-12 victory for the Republicans. Everybody votes on party lines, and Republicans have that majority. I know from personal experience there are some Democrats who care deeply about South Africa and about Africa generally. I'm sure they will voice objections and suggest this man is not an appropriate choice and not a good fit. But I assume Republicans, once again, very loyal to Trump and in many cases not knowing or caring that much about South Africa, sadly, will rubber stamp it. I mean, the only thing that seems to stop these nominees at the moment is some major personal scandal that's seen beyond the pale. As far as we know, Bozell does not have that.
Yeah. So, this man comes, and if he does, eventually get posted in South Africa following all the processes in the US, he's going to come here as tensions between South Africa and the US have really escalated recently with the Trump administration members and right-wing groups here in South Africa really fanning those flames of misinformation. And one wonders if he's the type of person who believes that. Is he a type of person that you can engage with? South Africans are asking themselves now, what should they brace for? Is this someone, especially given the clash in our values between South Africa and the Trump administration, how do we even find common ground? Having assessed and looked at this man, what do you think we need to brace for as South Africa? I know it's a tough question. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would brace for trouble and expect the worst potentially. I mean, as you're saying, relations between the two countries do seem at the lowest point for decades, and obviously that includes South Africa's ambassador to the US getting kicked out recently, and even just in the last few days, Elon Musk, of course, himself born in South Africa, now Donald Trump's close ally, was tweeting yet again along the lines of very few people know that there is a major political party in South Africa that is actively promoting white genocide. And he made a lot of bogus claims, and Musk is actively stirring this. I think Trump, as much as he ever thinks about it, probably agrees. And everything we know about Bozell suggests he'll be cut from the same cloth. He'll be listening to Elon Musk on issues like that and coming in, trying to wield a sledgehammer and cause trouble. So, I don't know what common ground there is going to be found. Certainly not on the issue of Israel, for example. Maybe on issues around the economy, maybe even a bit on Russia and Ukraine. I don't know, but yeah, it's going to be a rough ride, I think. Yeah. And maybe one of those moments when you look beyond the ambassador to some of the more long-standing officials, or find other ways to communicate.
Yeah. So in short, we have to buckle up. I want to ask you about just what you're hearing in Washington, D.C. in as far as our potential nomination is concerned for ambassador there. Our president has indicated he's taking his time. He doesn't want to rush appointing the South African ambassador to the U.S. There are a lot of considerations that he has to make, so many suggestions of who he should be appointing. Some people feel, appoint someone who's white, maybe appoint someone who's Afrikaner, who maybe from the ANC, but someone who is from this group of people that Trump somehow believes are being persecuted in South Africa, just so that you appease him on that front. But there's some people who feel, no, appoint whoever you want to appoint as South Africa. But the problem with that is, when the credentials have got to be adopted and accepted by the US as well. Could we be facing a situation where the US, with all this hostility, they reject the candidate or the person the president appoints as an ambassador? What are you hearing on the ground about what will potentially be our next ambassador and how the white administration may respond to that?
Yeah, and in terms of what you're saying, I've heard that rumor that Andreas Nell, for example, might be one contender. I think it's one of these cases where if an ambassador was nominated who had some unfortunate statements in their past, and the right wing Twitter or X mob and others could sort of dig up something where, oh look, 15 years ago this person shouted "kill the Boer," or something about white genocide or something, then that would play extremely badly. And it's again one of those that I don't think Donald Trump himself spends that much time thinking about, but a single tweet from Elon Musk or an online outcry could scuttle such a nomination. But otherwise, if it's a relatively mainstream person, black or white, who doesn't have tricky statements in their past, I think it would probably be fine. Again, more through benign neglect than anything else. That there's such a full agenda every day, so many scandals and controversies and foreign wars and other things occupying the time. I don't think they're going to go out of their way to create a problem here. And in terms of that dilemma that you outlined, do you deliberately play nice with Trump and bend the knee, or do you do your own thing and go more aggressively? Always a hard one to judge. All I would say is, I remember, we had a single week recently where Emmanuel Macron of France and Keir Starmer of Britain both, laid on the flattery pretty thick and told Trump how great he was. And those meetings went quite smoothly. And Starmer, for example, came clutching a letter inviting Trump to meet the king of Britain and so on. And then 2 or 3 days later, Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine showed up with a slightly more combative mode, and that went very badly, and he was drummed out of the White House, and there was a terrible display of bullying and berating and so on. And I think some people felt not for one moment would they defend what Trump did, which was disgraceful and an incredible diplomatic disaster. But they also felt, perhaps Zelensky could have played it differently diplomatically and just flattered Trump's ego and said nice things and kept him happy as Macron and Starmer had done. So I think you saw in that single week both approaches, and some would argue the merits of one and some the other. I think domestically in Ukraine, Zelensky actually got a lot of respect for standing up to Trump, but arguably pushed back the peace talks a little bit. Yeah.
Just lastly, before we wrap up, David, I want to ask you about something I told the listeners about yesterday, this unbelievable story of these senior officials in the Trump administration, who included the vice president and the secretary of state, by the way, who were discussing this highly sensitive, classified information on that messaging service Signal, unaware that there's a journalist in the group who was seemingly invited by mistake. There was shock and disbelief around the world, and I'm sure in DC as well, because this journalist was included in a group chat with these senior officials in the Trump administration talking about these war plans in Yemen, sensitive security information that could have serious implications, where they're even sharing emojis. You look at the language that they used. How is the Senate and just the congressmen and women responding to this? I mean, I know Democrats have been wanting to interrogate officials over this security breach. Has that happened? Is that expected to happen? How's the Trump administration explaining this?
Yeah, it's certainly a shocker that has stunned Washington, an incredible security breach. And Democrats got lucky because there was already scheduled to be a Senate hearing on Tuesday that included the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, and the CIA Director, John Radcliffe. So there was no escape for them. They were publicly grilled about this and were pretty evasive, and sometimes you could see all the wheels turning, and they were claiming that this information was not classified, to which the Democrats responded, well, if that's the case, why don't you just reveal these messages? And they had no answer to that. It was quite a rough ride, and probably just the boost that the Democrats needed after a bad few weeks to be able to turn the fire on the Trump administration. Trump himself claims this is just a glitch and it wasn't classified. And I think his view is this will all blow over in a few days. But yeah, it's the only story in town at the moment. It's getting a lot of scrutiny and coverage. Many Democrats saying that heads should roll, that some of these leading figures, such as Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, should resign over this. They're articulating how this could have put the lives of the US military at risk if this information had fallen into the wrong hands. And surprise, surprise, the Trump administration might actually be making it worse for themselves because, they've gone on the offensive trying to denounce this journalist as, quote, a sleazebag. And Trump saying that nobody reads this magazine and it's going downhill and so on, and disputing some of this report, and that has led some to say journalist Jeffrey Goldberg should publish all the conversation, all the messages in this Signal group.
Yeah, that is David Smith there, who is the Washington DC's bureau chief for The Guardian.